All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mindgasms. So I'm going to do another book review video here, and I'm going to talk about this book by Deleuze and Guattari called Anti-Oedipus, Capitalism and Schizophrenia. Now, this is a super seminal work by Deleuze and Guattari, who were themselves very seminal figures in philosophy. And this is Deleuze and Guattari here. And of course, this is a very complex book, Capitalism and Schizophrenia and Anti-Oedipus. And this is a particularly it's difficult to understand because it's such a complex book, of course. And I'm just basically making this one video about this first basic idea right now. But just to sum up what I understand, I might do another entire video series on this book, but I need to understand it better first. So just to sum up, just basically what this book is about is that Deleuze in particular, and Freud as well, were Deleuze was against Freud for the most part. He was charitable to some of his ideas, but he was really critical of others, and he was very critical of his Oedipus complex. But we'll come back to that. But anyway, so anti-Oedipus, it's basically against. Deleuze and Guattari, they're kind of attaching this idea of Freud's idea of Oedipus Rex to capitalism and schizophrenia, or schizophrenia, depending on how you pronounce it. And they're kind of making these analogies within comparing the capitalist system in society to different body parts, and how we're basically just like machines that are slaves to capitalism. That's probably an oversimplification of what their message is, but that kind of is, it's kind of at least a piece of what they're saying with this book. And so, of course, this is they have very interesting and sophisticated thoughts on this. I have to give my opinions, and I don't entirely agree with them, and I find them to be confusing. And also, they get a little bit extreme to me too. But let's go a little bit more into Deleuze and Guattari, as well as a little bit more in the book here. And of course, the video, as you can see, is called Freud's Transcendent Phallus. So we're going to talk specifically about his idea of penis envy. So again, this is Capitalism and Schizophrenia, and then that's Deleuze and Guattari there. And so they were Marxists, but their work itself was not really explicitly political. It wasn't really about Marxism per se. They just were Marxists, and that affected their lens on this. And of course, Capitalism and Schizophrenia indicates that they're very critical of capitalism, but they actually properly get into the details of it, and they have criticisms of capitalism itself as well. So of course, people oversimplify what their positions are Marxism, and how, they maybe claim that anti-Oedipus, capitalism, and schizophrenia is just this kind of like anti-capitalist screed, which it really isn't. It's much more philosophical, and it gets into criticizing and building on ideas of particular philosophers. And Deleuze, he was basically against Freud. I'll probably add the links to these. Chief Keef, aka Tim Keefe, a long time ago, we did a series on Deleuze called Delusional, about a book where we go into Deleuze's thoughts on various famous philosophers, and whether he saw them as allies or enemies. And Freud was an enemy of his, if I remember correctly. And I'll also put the link for the video we did discussing the book by Deleuze and Guattari called What is Philosophy, which is actually their simplest and easiest book to understand. So that's good for sure. And Anyway, so you can see the crazy picture of Christian Bale here. That is the indicating the schizophrenic aspect of capitalism and schizophrenia, where we talk about they claim that basically that capitalism makes you schizophrenic. And oh, I just lost my place here. Here we go. So as you can see in that crazy picture of Christian Bale there, he's a very great actor for playing crazy people. I believe that's a collection of images from his movie The Machinist, where he literally plays, like, I don't know if it's necessarily a schizophrenic, but certainly a crazy person. And he so in The Machinist, I mean, spoilers for if you've seen the movie before, but it turns out that he's crazy, and he did a hit and run on a kid, and then he basically constructed a whole new identity for himself so he could deny the past and deny to create the crazy shit that he's done. So you can apply, like, Christian Bale's character going crazy in that movie to Deleuze and Guattari's theory in capitalism and schizophrenia, because, you know, their ideas relate back to the Marxist ideas of alienation, and that, you know, capitalism makes you go crazy. The movie itself doesn't really have anything to do with capitalism, but it's a good way to showcase what they're trying to talk about in the book. It's like, it makes you so crazy that you're following the pursuits of capitalism, regardless of how much you think it's good for you or not, or how much you want to or not. You could apply that as an accurate analogy, I would say. So, and then, oh, I went to the wrong picture there. So let me go back here for a sec. Oh, okay. Okay. So anyway, yeah, that's a crazy picture of I almost said Polish Christian Bale, my friend Mache there. So obviously they talk about how capitalism can make you schizophrenic and crazy because it's like you're trying to pursue what you actually want to do with your life, but you're distracted by the views of capitalism, like, you know, going to university to get a good job so you can make good money, even though regardless of how much you want to do that or not, right? So anyway, this Deleuze and Guattari, they were influenced by post-structuralism, among other movements, like the Frankfurt critical theory in the Frankfurt School, and basically Marx as well, as I said. So all of these thinkers go into their theories, along with the work of many other philosophers, of course. So this is the famous or infamous Derrida and Foucault, as you can see here. I know I defend them a lot all the time on my channel and criticize public intellectuals like James Lindsay and Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin for getting the term postmodernism all wrong. And it's debatable whether whether Deleuze and Foucault, or not Deleuze and Foucault, Foucault and Derrida were even actually postmodernists, and they never applied that word to themselves, and other people applied it to them, but they didn't know what they were talking about. They could debatably be seen as post-structuralists based on what they were doing, but they didn't call themselves post-structuralists either. But basically, whether you call them post-structuralists or postmodernists, their project was basically to criticize the institutions of modern Western society, like science, reason, rationality, religion, government, democratic governments, the law, all those sorts of things. They were criticizing them. Now, the area where people go wrong is where they accuse people like Foucault and Derrida, who themselves agreed with each other vehemently sometimes too. They accuse them of using this term deconstruction that Derrida coined, to mean that we should literally break down these structures of Western society, like some sort of authoritarian Marxist reactionary revolution, which is so bullshit. They were making descriptive analyses of these modern institutions. They were not advocating for tearing them down. They wanted to fix them. They're very different from the Marxists and the critical theorists in that sense. And in fact, a lot of people claim that Derrida and Foucault were left-wingers, but they were sympathetic to some of Marx's ideas, like his theory of ideology, but they were not for bringing down Western structures there. So this is Deleuze and Guattari here. Oh, actually, sorry. Before that was actually Adorno and Horkheimer. So this is Deleuze here, and that's Guattari. Of course, they're kind of weird looking, and of course, they've got that. One thing that Deleuze and Guattari do have in common with Foucault and Deleuze is they have this really verbose, abstract, and almost seemingly deliberately confusing writing style. So it's phenomenally difficult to figure out what the fuck they're talking about sometimes. So you could say that, but they're not necessarily. You could say that they're like associated with, as I said, post-structuralism, critical theory, and Marxism, but you wouldn't necessarily label them as such, although other than Marxist. But like I said, that has very little to do with their philosophical writings. And so this is a good image here I found of capitalism and schizophrenia. So like Deleuze and Guattari's notion of capitalism, it kind of follows the standard Marxist critique, like, the bourgeoisie have all the money. If we look at this boat with an American flag on it as a country of America, there's increasing wealth disparities. So less and less people have more of the money. So there's this big fat rich guy sitting on a pile of money. He's making the ship sink because it's unbalanced, and this guy's throwing the anchor of socialism there to save everyone else. Say what you want to about that. I think socialism has a lot of merit, but Marxism in particular has some oversimplifications within it. Although a lot of right-wingers and people in general get Marxism totally wrong, and they think it's all this like one encompassing thing, even though they're totally different types of Marxists who are in opposition to each other. Like the Stalinists and Maoists and Trotskyists and Leninists tend to be much more authoritarian, therefore the authoritarian government control of society. But then there are other Marxists who are for, like, they're more like anarcho-syndicalists or libertarian socialists, like Noam Chomsky or the YouTuber Vosh, or I believe it's Kropotkin, or one of those original anarchist philosophers. The original anarchist philosophers were all super right-wing. They saw basically they saw anarchism as a means of achieving left-wing goals. So anyway, and no, it was Bakunin. Yeah, he talked about anarcho-syndicalism a lot, and a lot of socialists, democratic socialists, and libertarian socialists talk about this too, which is basically worker co-ops, right? So democratic worker control of society rather than authoritarian government structures. And it's like anarchist in the sense that there's no democratic government still, but there is still collective group organizations. Anyway, that's basically like the conception of the flaws of capitalism that Marxists like Deleuze and Guattari subscribe to. And okay, so we're back to this picture here. So I think I have a couple more things to get into here. So I haven't even gotten to Freud yet because there's so much background to get into there, of course. So, oh yeah, so as I showed you before, I showed you that picture of Adorno and Horkheimer here. I'll show you that picture again, because as I showed you the last picture there, that's a picture of Deleuze and Guattari, and this is Adorno and Horkheimer. Okay, so I mentioned critical theory. So Deleuze and Foucault are associated with post-structuralism, which influenced Deleuze and Guattari along with Marxism, as I said, right? And I'm not actually sure what type of Marxism they subscribe to, so that'd be interesting to look up. But anyway, that's not important right now. So Adorno and Horkheimer, they wrote a famous book called The Dialectic of Enlightenment. I should add the link for that video to the description of this video too. It's one of my most recent ones. And it came from, so Adorno and Horkheimer came from the Frankfurt School, and they were in the field of academic thought known as critical theory, of course. And so they were actually really extreme with their criticisms. I think they had some good points where they were talking about like how fascism and the Nazis and the Holocaust were actually contrary to what a lot of public intellectuals were saying at the time, which is that Nazism and fascism were totally irrational. Adorno and Horkheimer claim that the Nazis and the Holocaust were actually, and Hitler were actually the height of reason. And I think that actually makes a good point. And they talk about how reason became a mythology in Western society and it went too far. And you can look at this in the materialistic way that Nazis were organized, right? They were very like ordered and structured in the way they did things. And it was like extremely authoritarian and micromanaging and integrating like extreme reason into everything, right? But then I think the critical theorists like Adorno and Horkheimer went too far when they started talking about how basically the Enlightenment, they don't never necessarily explicitly say this, that's important to emphasize, but they basically are expressing the sentiment that the Enlightenment was a mistake. Not only were the Nazis the height of the reason of enlightenment, the Enlightenment itself was a mistake. So that's where I think they get a little carried away. But like I said, Deleuze and Guattari were influenced by Adorno and Horkheimer. They didn't necessarily think that the Enlightenment was a mistake, but they do write a lot about how, the flaws of reason when it goes too far. And I don't think they necessarily applied reason to the Nazis and stuff, but they did talk a lot about the flaws of reason and rationality and the Enlightenment structures as post-structuralists like Derrida and Foucault did, right? Like the institutions of religion, science, reason, rationality, democratic governments, etc. So like I said, anyway, to now that we've gone through some of the background there, to get back to basically the main point of this here. So what the main point of this video is supposed to be is, so Freud's theory of penis envy, right? So Freud, of course, as many of you know, he was one of the famous first psychologists, not necessarily one of the first psychologists, well, he might have been, but he basically founded like psychoanalysis and talk therapy, although if I understand correctly, there's debate about that, about whether other people came up with it first. But people can come up with the same types of ideas simultaneously often anyway, right? So I thought this was a funny meme. I've got 99 problems and penis envy is all of them. So like I said, Deleuze and Guattari, they were basically against Freud, although they did say some charitable things of him. And I personally am not against Freud. I think they're overly critical of him. But also, like, a lot of his ideas, while interesting, have not been borne out by the science of psychology. So that's important to note. But he did have some really interesting ideas, like his book, The Interpretation of Dreams. That's not necessarily scientific by today's standards, but he explores some really interesting archetypes and dreams that are very plausible, I would say. And he also has this book called Civilization and Its Discontents, which the historian Thaddeus Russell, who wrote a great book called The Renegade History of the United States, talks about a lot the civilization and its discontents, and about how, there's a whole lot of civilizational repression that people are going around basically letting allowing us to psychologically ruin ourselves. And he also talked about the death drive, so-called death drive, basically like how a lot of human behavior is motivated by the fear of death. That's more specifically gotten into by the famous psychologist Ernest Becker in his really great book that I highly recommend called The Denial of Death. But anyway, he also had some fucking crack job theories like Oedipus Rex, of course. So the idea that basically, loosely based on the Greek mythological story of Oedipus Rex, that you're sexually attracted to your mother, because in that story, this is an oversimplification, but a guy killed his father and then had sex with his mother because he was attracted to his mother. It wasn't necessarily that he killed his father in order to have sex with his mother, but there kind of some circumstantial things that happened, and he killed his father and then had sex with his mother, either way you look at it. And then he also talks about, like, basically there are other memes criticizing, like, what's your relationship with your mother? Are you sexually attracted to her, or are you scarred by your mother? And he talks about like oral fixations and stuff. But then, of course, when he is smoking a cigar all the time, I don't know if this is necessarily related to criticisms of penis envy, but he of course famously said sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Anyway, I thought this was a funny meme. I've got 99 problems and penis envy is all of them. So, just to loosely define this, he basically thought that, everyone admires penises, everyone admires their penises. There's this masculine signaling going on a lot. And then women also envy penises and they want to like have them and stuff, which of course is kind of fucking bullshit. And, they have a point that men like make these phallic symbols and stuff. But basically what Deleuze and Guattari talk about is they use this term, Freud's transcendent phallus, as if like there's penis envy is such a powerful force that it's almost like this transcendent metaphysical force influencing society in some sort of magic metaphysical way, where men are always going around showing off their dicks and women are always like envying the men for having the confidence associated with their dicks, or like they literally envy men for having dicks, which I think is pretty fucking ridiculous and hilarious. But anyway, I thought a great recent thing that happened in popular culture that is a great illustration of Freud's transcendent phallus and penis envy is what people were talking about recently with Jeff Bezos. Of course, he had a penis rocket built, a giant rocket that looks very much like a penis built, and then he went to space. And it's a giant phallic symbol, basically. See, like everyone, well, a lot of people know his Blue Origin rocket. I mean, look at the head of that. That looks like a fucking circumcised penis right there, right? So he has like, he flew into the sky and fucked the sky with his giant penis rocket. If that's not like the epitome of a phallic symbol, I don't know what is. So I thought that was really hilarious. And then also relating, other than just the Oedipus complex that Freud talks about, that Deleuze and Guattari criticize, I think Jeff Bezos building that penis rocket is also a great illustration of their overall message in Capitalism and Schizophrenia. And this idea that lefties talk about the increasingly disproportionate distribution of wealth, more and more rich people getting richer as more and more poor people getting poorer, and less people have more and more of the money. He's projected to be like a trillionaire if he keeps making money by sometime within the next few years or so, if I'm not mistaken. And he used all this money that he's made to fly to the moon. Now, I'm not as critical of this as some people are. I think, like, good for him. I'm not of this super lefty opinion that billionaires should not exist. I think people should be allowed to make as much money as they fucking want to. I do think that rich people should be taxed more, though, although there is some merit to the criticism that when you increase taxes on the rich, they just find more loopholes to end up paying zero taxes, or they move to different countries, or they store more money offshore. Now, some politicians propose like changing tax laws so to get rid of those loopholes. So if you do that along with that, that makes sense. But if you don't, it's not necessarily a good idea. And it depends on whether you're talking about a wealth tax or an income tax or a corporate tax. I don't necessarily know the details about those, but as far as I understand, taxing one of those more than the others, it can be more or less effective than the others. But anyway, like this is like, especially if you're a Marxist like Deleuze and Guattari are, this is the like Jeff Bezos and his penis rocket are like the epitome of this rich uber bourgeoisie capitalist exhibiting his massive phallic symbol by building a giant penis rocket and fucking the sky with it. So yeah, anyway, I think that's as I said, that's a great way to look at Freud's transcendent phallus and his theory of penis envy, and the way that Deleuze and Guattari criticize it in their book called Anti-Oedipus Capitalism and Schizophrenia by calling it his transcendent phallus, because of course he didn't call it that, but that was, I think, a great criticism of it. So yeah, anyway, hope you enjoyed this little summation of Freud's transcendent phallus, as Deleuze and Guattari call it in Anti-Oedipus Capitalism and Schizophrenia, and then making fun of his penis envy theory. As I said, I probably will end up doing a whole video series on this book because I've done lots of other videos on Deleuze. As I said, check that out. I have a delusional playlist with Tim Keefe about all our podcasts about what Deleuze thought about various philosophers, and as well as that book called What is Philosophy? So yeah, anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Look forward to the next one. Next video will be a podcast with Dusty, aka the Woke Centrist, who I always talk with. On Friday, we're going to talk about 2 short stories by Isaac Asimov, the famous science fiction author, called The Last Question and The Last Answer. And the first one, The Last Question, is about this. Actually, they're both about this supercomputer named Multivac. And in the first one, The Last Question, it's about humans building this supercomputer that can evolve and build new versions, increasingly evolve and build new versions of itself. And the humans they built this computer to get it to answer the question of, basically, can we stop the inevitable heat death of the universe? We can make all these technological advancements, but can we stop the destruction of the universe? And then throughout various generations of humans, as we spread out to and colonize other planets and develop our technology and allow ourselves to basically allow our minds to travel across space, we still cannot, even if we can conquer death, we can't stop the destruction of the universe, or can we? And they're basically trying to get Multivac to answer this question so they can eventually stop it, so humans can survive. Not only humans, but the universe can survive forever. So that story answers the question of whether Multivac knows whether the inevitable heat death of the universe can be stopped. And then the last answer, it's hard to say much about it without getting into spoilers, but it's about Multivac as well. And then a man who goes to the afterlife, and whether asks and answers the question of whether the afterlife is all it's cracked up to be. So yeah, look forward to that. And yeah, like I always say, click that like button, subscribe to the channel, click that bell to be notified when I come out with new videos. And of course, most importantly, please become a patron on Patreon if you haven't already. The link is in the description of this video, as always. And like I always say, I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all, and groove is in the heart. And yeah, investigate philosophers, even if they seem difficult to understand. The more you read about them, the better you'll understand them. And yeah, because learning is awesome. All right. Thanks again, everyone. And adios until next time.